Alright, today we're on day 11 of 28 days to master level chess tactics. In this position, it's white to move, and you can pause the video now. Alright, so I'm going to show this position and go through it, and then I'm going to go back to the beginning of this game, and I'm going to give you an example of how you can take a tactical position that you know ahead of time, solve it, and then go back and actually learn even more about how the winner, in this case white, increased his activity, used simple tactics to trade the correct pieces and get an attack. Alright, in this position, from a general perspective, it looks like white is down a pawn, although he has an attack on the king side with the knight and the queen, and he has this rather oddly placed rook on a6, and it looks like there's no way to get it over, quickly at least, onto the king side, at least at first. This rook is sitting here on e1, trying to hold down the back rank. Notice that these pawns are enclosing the king, so if he moves the rook, then the queen, well, I guess not right away, but there is a back rank threat on d1 eventually. With that in mind, we're focusing on decoy in this case, but you want to look for kind of crazy forcing moves in this position. Now, the queen could go to h5 and threaten mate in 1, but you also have to look at your opponent's defensive options, which the queen could just go to d3 or even f5, and it doesn't look like, for example, we play it, queen to h5, he could just go here, or queen to d3, and now he's covering the h7 square, and it doesn't look like white has a way to get in necessarily. And it's rather slow bringing this rook or this rook trying to reroute it, for example here. You just have to understand that black has enough time to stop it. Alright, so let's look at more forcing options. There's knight takes, but after rook takes, it doesn't really lead to anything. And it looks like you could swing the rook over here, and that does look crazy, but this is where you can lead to more advanced decoy examples. So the correct move in this position is rook to h6. And the reason this works is that it threatens a mate in 2 with rook to h8, and then queen check, and then a mate on here. Well, I guess that would be a mate in 3. Check, check, mate. So it is a somewhat hard position to defend. Now, if he takes, then obviously that leads to a discovered attack, which was what we talked about in, I think, day 7, 8, and 9. The discovered attack goes knight to e6, threatening mate here, and now the queen has to interpose, and you win the queen. Because otherwise, if the king moved anywhere, then you would just checkmate on g7. So the only way to defend in this position is queen to d3, and now if he goes rook check, then the queen is covering the h7 square. That's the long-range protection of the queen. But this opens up black to even more activity from white. Now he can move the knight here, and now he is threatening another mate in 1. So let's see how this goes. Black tries to hit back with f5, and the queen just goes forward. And now he does have a renewed threat, even just to go knight to g5, and then check, and then mate. And the rook can't come here because the knight's covering it. So black actually hits back in the game with queen to d2, just threatening a mate in 1. He doesn't really have any good options. But from this position is actually a mate in 4, if you want to calculate it. So the mate in 4 goes starting with a check, queen to e6. Now the rook has to come up, and then queen here. So if the rook takes, you'll just take. For example, let's just play it here. Rook takes, check, and then the rook is actually protecting this knight. The knight's covering that square, and you get this really cool looking checkmate. He doesn't go for that. He puts up a more stiff resistance after here, and then he does bring the rook back. But actually there's another forcing move that leads to a mate in 2 with knight to f6. Now the pawn is forced to take, and then you get checkmate here with the queen. So from the start of this position, you can see that you can use forcing ideas that will lead you to rook to h6. It's a pretty rare move, but the ideas of decoy and forcing moves and using a thought process will help you always look for ways to bring an extra piece into the attack when you don't find ways that actually lead to a direct attack right away. It's always helpful to just think, how can I bring an extra piece into the attack? So let's actually go back to the beginning of this game. I'm not going to cover it so in depth, but I want you to see how the game went for white. So basically, it starts a d4 game. We get a Queen's Indian, just developing pieces. This looks like a standard line. Maybe e4 would be played nowadays, I'm not sure. Alright, so black and white just develop. He takes, trading his active knight. Tries to open up room for his bishop. And then white plays e4, getting a big center. And now he uses basic tactics with d5 to ram that pawn down the d file. Now notice if the queen takes, then you actually have a discovered check with winning the queen. So he can't take that pawn, and that allows white just enough time to get very active. So black's trying to hit back on the queen side. He takes there, but then that allows white to pretty much own the center and get a lot of activity on the king side. Now he brings his queen in, queen to h5. Black finds a defensive resource, drawing the queen away. But after a couple more moves, activating his rook, activating his bishop and connecting his rooks, he wants to bring his knight to g5. And now I really like this move here. So a4. And the reason for that is because he wants to activate that rook. Notice that the bishop can't take it because it is pinned to his queen. But actually that's a really common way to activate a rook when it's just sitting on its initial square, is to just push pawns and open lines either on the A or the H files. Alright, the knight goes back, he takes, and now he does activate the rook on A6. It does seem the quickest way to activate it. The bishop takes, and now notice that when the bishop trades, the evaluation suddenly changes from roughly equal to a very almost winning position for white, because when you trade a piece, he traded the defender on f6, and he actually brought, with the move bishop takes, he brought the knight on his own move to g5. So the queen takes, which is another blunder, and now we get this final position here. So you can see how those little errors can add up to a way where your opponent gets just a little more activity, and then if he's sharp enough, he's going to find a strong attacking move and just continue his attack that way. We went pretty deep in this position, and thanks for following along. I'll see you in day 12.
Don't fret if you got the solution wrong. There will be another time.